Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I am pleased to welcome you to the October 2021 webinar series. Today, we have an in-demand, interesting, and contemporary topic named Impact of Data Science on Supply Chain Risk Management. My name is Mbonu Chigozie, a data scientist at the Hamoye AI Lab, and I'm your host for today. I'm joining this call from Lagos, Nigeria. Our distinguished speaker is a US Army veteran and currently serves as a managing partner at Pantot Solutions LLC, Dallas, Texas, with profound knowledge and expertise in the fields of energetic markets, risk management, and security supply chain management and logistics. He is also a principal partner and senior supply chain consultant for Airport Consulting Limited and a lecturer in supply chain management at the Sam Houston State University. As a global thought leader, he has facilitated masterclass and curated online courses for supply chain professionals and global leaders. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present to you Major Adebayo Adeleke.
Good day, everyone. Morning, afternoon, evening. Don't know what part of the world you all are, but I'm so honored and privileged to be here with you this morning. So thanks for that gracious introduction.
Thank you very much. We're so glad to have you here with us. Before we proceed with the presentation, please carefully take note of the following. You can feel free to make use of the chat box for chats and conversations around this topic. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat box, or better still, raise your hand and you'll be unmuted. Rest be assured that all questions will be attended to. At this point, I will now hand over the mic to Major Adeleke, who will take us through this session. Please relax and enjoy.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Chigozie. I really do appreciate it. And everyone on Hamoye, both folks in the rooms and folks online and that we're live, I'm really glad. As you can see, I'm just rolling off my bed. Yes, I have this going on today, but we're gonna have fun. So, as Chigozie said, I am a supply chain guy. I'm a supply chain guy, but supply chain is such a huge industry. So you have to be niche. I mean, you have to know from the length and breadth of it, both from hold on, do I have to get people in? Okay. It's rather an interesting field. How many of you, by the show of hands, I don't know, how many of you have heard one or two things about supply chain? How many of you are so in depth into supply chain before we go further? So I know what my audience is like, and I know what I'm going to be, how far, how much I'm going to deep dive. Okay. By show of hands. Okay. One. There's one person so far. I know something about supply chain. Okay. All right. Two. All right. That's fine. Awesome. All right. The reason why supply chain logistics falls under the supply chain. So our supply chain is a huge umbrella. So it covers logistics and all this stuff. And I'm going to break it down a bit before I go further. So caveat before we start going on, I know a lot of you and I'm just, projecting through what I know. A lot of you have gone through a lot of reading throughout the week. I do not intend to bog you down with slides. So I don't bring slides, but I know my talking points. I really don't like slides much because it kind of, especially when we're going over the Zoom class or webinar like this, kind of takes away from that interaction from my perspective. So I know over the course of the week, I have gone through several of the slides, and on weekends, I think the last thing I want to see is slide as well. And I hope you all will take away. But this is recorded, so you understand. You get to see some of these things I'm going to do. But just take notes, copious notes as we go through this. So a little bit about myself. I know Chigozie gave some gracious introduction. I mean, every time I'm introduced, I'm quite flattered. I spent 20 years in the U.S. Army, where I rose from the rank of a private, which is the least, to the rank of a major. So I crossed over at some point in my career. And once I crossed over, I came in. I'll just give you my supply chain journey for folks that want to know a little bit about me. I went to school in Nigeria. I spent majority of my formative years in a town called Ile-Ife. Then I finished my high school in Ile-Ife, came over to the US for a couple of years, and I came back to a school called, now called Babcock University. It used to be called Adventist Seminary of West Africa. That was there. So then I left. The school now became Babcock University. And then I joined the United States military and I started my endeavor. My intent was to join the military to get some experience and then go to university and further my education. But I fell in love with the opportunities over there in the United States Army. So I continue. So the funny thing about United States Army is that they let you go to school and also be part of the military. So I was able to do both at the same time. So it was such a very interesting endeavor for me and I enjoyed it. But when I came to the military, I came in as a supply chain, as a logistical specialist. I was working in the warehouse, I was doing dispatching. So I came from I entered at the entry level. So I understand the full length and breadth of supply chain from the beginning, till the end. And then I spent about 5 years and I crossed over to become an officer, became a lieutenant. And then once you become an officer, it's a different ball game. You begin to see things at a different level, both the tactical, the operational, and the strategic level. I work all the way from tactical to the operation. Actually, one of my jobs before I retired, I was the chief of contracting operation in the country of Jordan, where I was talking to the King Abdullah of Jordan and also talking to the US ambassador, briefing them on contracts, working in Lebanon and Syria and whatnot. So I've had the full length and impact of supply chain, not only at the tactical level or the operational level, but also at the strategic level, how you affect geopolitical alignments and whatnot. So I'm not a novice to this, just giving you a quick background. So when you see me talking about certain things, I'm coming from at least I have some knowledge base about it. So what is supply chain? For some of you that don't have a clue about supply chain, supply chain is the aggregation of processes and tasks involved in moving goods and services from their point of origin to their final destination, which means I want to be able to move, let's say, for example, coffee as a product, where does it originate from the farmer? So every process from farming of that coffee beans, all the way to harvesting, all the way to transporting it to warehousing, to processing, all the way to getting it to the customers on their table drinking coffee, all the way to the disposal of it, until the particular coffee re-enters the earth again. That particular process is supply chain. It's often vast. In the United States, US population is about 350 million. And I can tell you categorically by statistics, about 50 million people in the United States population has one or two things to do with supply chain management in their work. So it's such a huge and vast industry. But for me, I took on this aspect of supply chain risk management. It is very interesting because it talks about risk. A risk is anything that will prevent you from gaining your X state. And I took a keen interest in that because of my keen ability in the United States, and as the military. How can I, when I retired, I started thinking, how can I, because I spend most of my time in logistics and procurement, and they're all part of the umbrella of supply chain. So before I go further into why I got into supply chain risk management, we're going to definitely get into we're talking about the data, the impact of data in supply chain, and I'll kind of brief you. So you guys are all data junkies, for lack of a better word. So I'll paint the picture. I'm kind of taking you from what I was and how I got to be and what I'm doing and how you guys can see how data impacts supply chain. What you're doing is actually heavily involved in supply chain and supply chain risk management. So before I retired, before I talk about my retirement, the umbrella of supply chain, you have the words like logistics, procurement, warehousing, distribution, transportation. They are all under the umbrella of supply chain. Supply chain is an end-to-end, from the beginning to the end. We have the upstream of supply chain, which talks about, from the origin to the midpoint. We have the midstream that talks about What is in between, the warehousing and whatnot. We'll talk about the downstream, which is the last mile to get it from the point of distribution to the customers. They're all under the umbrella of supply chain. Supply chain is such a huge part. So when you hear the word procurement, procurement is an entity, is a dimension under supply chain. Logistics has several dimensions. Logistics as a dimension has several parts to it. Anything that encompasses logistics involves distribution. Distribution can be warehousing and also can be transportation. Now, transportation, which is a very integral part of distribution methods, broken into several parts. You have the rail, you have the water, you have the air, and you have the road, right? So those 4 dimensions, sub-dimensions, they are under transportation, and transportation is under distribution, and distribution is under part of logistics, and part of logistics is under part of supply chain. You got it? On the procurement side, you have procurement as also an umbrella under supply chain, and then you have the issue of contracting, which is a part of procurement. You can use contracting as a tool in procurement. And then you have strategic sourcing. You have people that are buying. All those things are pillars under procurement, which procurement is also another dimension under supply chain. And then you have other dimensions as well, supply diversity. And then we have new additions that are coming in there right now, risk management, you have digital transformation, and then we'll talk about the issue of all these new ecosystems, the technological ecosystem, which data we are going to be talking about. All these new dimensions are part of what encompasses what supply chain is all about. So supply chain is such a huge entity. Anything that is involved in the movement of goods and services from the point of origin to the point of destination, to the point of destination, the end state, and how it re-enters the herd. All these things are part of supply chain. So you're talking about data, you're talking about all these ecosystems that works in either artificial intelligence, the machine learning, the blockchains of this world, the circularity, the sustainability, all these new progressive ideas, they are also part of supply chain. Now, the reason why I chose supply chain risk management is because after 20 years of learning and studying and becoming part of a supply chain industry, I began to understand how can I merge my skill as a military man and also having worked in supply chain for so long. So what I did was, okay, I love supply chain, this is what I do. And then I bring about the issue of security that I've been doing all my life, and I've merged it together, and I found a space for it with supply chain risk management, understanding what the risk is. How do I move my stuff from point A to point B, and what are the risks involved in it? And how can this risk be mitigated at any given point? How can this risk be of great, how can I turn these risks to be of something of value along the line? So these are some of the things that I have kind of put in my niche. So as I continue on this journey, then I realized that risk management is a very interesting part, as you guys have seen on the news, or you probably have experienced it, regardless of the part of the world you're found in. Everything that is going on right now is blamed on supply chain management. There's a global supply chain issues going on right now. There is a shortage of chips to make computers and also to be put in cars. That's why the cars are out. They are so expensive these days. Even if you find one, there's 2022 cars are not on the market yet. And it's a very interesting part, because I'm hearing news that they're removing parts from old vehicles to produce new cars. That is how the shortage is. And I'll explain the reason why. It's all part of the risk management that we're talking about. And then we'll move to the issue of data and how you guys play in factions. So I'm laying the foundation, kind of giving a clarity of thought of what we have going on here. So you have all this scarcity going on everywhere you go right now. There's global supply chain. They're talking about start ordering your Christmas present because there's a shortage of parts, there's a shortage of stuff, globally. And even if you get it, you might not be able to get it in hand. So you should start ordering your stuff right now, which is absolutely true. Even for some of us that are in the United States, they're telling us that turkey is going to be scarce because there is no enough farmers out there, caring and making sure that there is enough turkey for Thanksgiving. Imagine that. Toys are scarce, chips are not, lithium batteries are expensive. It's just almost every material, sources of good are going out of style. Why? Is because of COVID impact. COVID has impacted, and the impact is so far reaching that some of us that into risk management did not even anticipate this. So imagine COVID happened. Immediately, most of the manufacturing hubs shut down, but now with vaccination and all, everybody is getting back on track. But there is a part. Some are vaccinated, some are not. And when you happen to have that kind of stuff, and you still have COVID so knee deep, we're so knee deep in COVID right now, this issue of labor shortages. Now, labor shortages is a very interesting part, because it's the one thing that we believe that when the countries open up, everybody will be rushing back to work. But we're experiencing something in the United States right now they call the Great Resign. The Great Resignation, rather. People are leaving their jobs because employers are asking them to come back to work. People are like, no, I'm not coming back to work for the same fees. Either you pay me higher. A lot of people have gone through a lot during this COVID. So people are now demanding higher pay. Employers are not willing to pay more. So now people are not coming to work. I was reading news about a couple of weeks ago. They were to, invite the National Guard to come and drive students to school in the state of Massachusetts because they don't have drivers. And the same thing is plaguing the United States as well, because there's shortage of truck drivers on the street. So if you do not have truck drivers to move your cargo, how are you going to get your goods to the shelf, to the customer? So all these things are there's the ripple effect, the second and third order effect of this. And this is just talking about, what every part of the world is experiencing this. Most manufacturers cannot get enough labor to work. If you cannot get enough labor to operate your manufacturing plant, how in the world are we able to meet demand? Demand is not going to stop. The reason why we're in the business of supply chain is the fact that we are all enslaved to demand. Demand dictates the tune, and supply dance to it. So right now, there's high demand, but there's shortage of supply. Even the goods, the availability of the natural resources that is needed is under resource too, because there's no labor to go out there to dig it out. In farmlands across the world, people are not going to farm. So for example, let's take the country of Nigeria. We look about the grains belt. There's a tuber belt in Nigeria, if you follow Nigerian agricultural product, and there's a grain belt. The grain belt in Nigeria has been plagued by Boko Haram. And imagine people are not allowed to go to work to their farms. If people are not allowed to go to their farms, how in the world do you expect them to produce grains? If they cannot produce grains, then there'll be shortage of exportation. There's shortage of exportation. Whatever those grains are going to before, those grains will never get there. So in that part, there's shortage across the board. So what we are seeing right now is the impact of risk that either this will have been prevented, maybe or maybe not, depending on how you look at it, depending on the lens at which you are actually viewing this. So I'm just laying the background of what supply chain risk management is. So I'm in the space of managing risk that involves the movement of goods and services. It's very vast and very robust, very deep, and there's a depth and breadth to it. So always talked about length and depth and breadth. In every profession you go to, you have to make a decision. Do I want to go deep or do I want to go wide? Depending on what you're experiencing and what you foresee in your industry. Does your industry require you to have a wide range of experience, or do you have depth of experience? It's a very interesting conversation that you can have with yourself. Do I want to go deep in data science, or do I have to go wide in data science? It all depends on what the market dictates. Some have been able to, I don't think you can actually do both at the same time, but it depends. Maybe you can in data science, but some want to be very specific in what they're very focused on data and other part of their profession. And also one want to be like, no, I want to go wide. I just want to go as much as possible. And oftentimes there are pros and cons to it. So now back to the issue of supply chain risk management. So that's why I focused my niche on. I loved to understand, to feel my pulse. I want to put my thumb on the pulse of the operation. So that's why I enjoy being in supply chain risk management, because you can actually help in predicting using data. And this is how data. We spent the last 20 minutes kind of talking about how we get there, but now we're in the midst of how data can impact global supply chain. So in my area of work, I work about 13 different risk areas, and I'm going to spell it out to you so that you understand, and I'll break it down. There are different risk areas that plague supply chain. There are so much of it. Some are major risks, some are like we're calling major risks or minor risks. Major risks, just like you have it in everything. Major risks that whatever happens to those risks, they will take you out. So there are 13 major risks that I focus on, or I call it the 13 apostles of supply chain risk management. Availability of supply. Availability of supply is the number one in my book. If you cannot have supply, you cannot produce anything or services. So availability of supply is one of the major risks. I'll name those major risks first, and then we'll go from there, and how data kind of impact supply chain risk management. The second one is quality. Quality. There's one thing to have supply. There's one thing the supply to be of quality, and that's one thing that most people that issue of quality has so far-reaching stakeholders. Some into quality engineering are part of it, supply chain are part of it. We're quite concerned about the risk. Imagine having to buy something and it's not of quality, it cannot stand the test of time. So that particular risk in itself is huge risk, especially when it comes to movement of goods and services. We have the legal and regulatory. Legal and regulatory is quite huge. Something has to be legal and something has to be regulatory. Are your product and services, are they meeting those regulatory demands? Or are regulatory issues concerning the way you are actually operating? That could stifle, that could break any supply chain globally, if they are not meeting the legal and regulatory standard of organization, or they're part of countries which they're actually operating. Political climate. This is one of my risk areas that I've, even despite the fact that I focus on supply chain risk management, geopolitical risk is where I really, cut my teeth because of my travels globally. I've been blessed to be able to work in 35 different countries, and I know firsthand how geopolitical tangles, I call it geopolitical tangles, kind of affect the way people, the way goods and services move across borders. I'll tell you a prime example. I was in Jordan as a chief of contracting operations, and if you ever study the geographical location of the country of Jordan, it's surrounded about 7 different countries. So we were in the country of Jordan doing an operation. Also, I was in Syria as well, helping out whatever is going on in Syria. So Jordan borders Iraq. And that border has been closed for so long because of all this stuff that is going on globally. So what we've done, I was able to advocate with suppliers using contracting vehicles to be able to talk to the powers in Jordan to be able to open that border, because normally the supply chain that enters that part of Iraq comes through Kuwait, and it takes days, about 7 days of trucking to get supplies from when they debark from when they debark from the Gulf, because Gulf is the only waterways they have over there for heavy cargo. So imagine getting all your heavy cargo from the Gulf, and then you have to travel across the border. It takes days to get over there. So if we open that side so we're able to use contracting vehicles to be able to open that border side, convince both countries to open that border side. If that happens, can you believe that you can actually cut across all these things and save days and days, even months in some instance, so that you can get your cargo through the Red Sea, right, between Egypt and Jordan. And once you drop it over there, it takes about 4 hours to drive from Jordan to across inside Iraq. That's pretty awesome. So imagine that political conundrum we solved, just eliminate a whole bunch of issues when it comes to supply chain in that particular region. So instead of going through Kuwait, which a lot of things can happen along that route, you just eliminated so much risk that can happen over 7 days of travel by just going through. You just have to add another leg to route your container through the top of Africa into Egypt, because Egypt borders Jordan, and then bring your pod over there, bring your cargo over there, debark it, and then once you debark it, you move it. It takes 4 hours from trucking across the desert to Iraq. Imagine how that kind of conversation, it eliminates so much risk. I really enjoyed that experience because it really impacted a lot of things. Though we're doing it for our warfighter, but it helped to open the relationship between those two countries, Jordan, Iraq, and some other neighboring countries as well. So that's one part. So we talk about geopolitical climate is huge risk. Actually, nothing moves unless something happens. If China said, you know what, we're closing our borders today, the whole world is going to hurt because there will be nothing coming in, nothing coming out. So it is quite important to massage that geopolitical ego, as we call it. And then we have the value chain security and physical asset. You know, the movement of goods and services is one thing. Securing those goods and services is another thing entirely. You know, some goods are, higher, and some goods are more expensive than the other. Oftentimes, most people don't understand that cargo that goes on the road needs to be secured as well. That's why a lot of people put in load jack, they put in tracking devices on there. That's at least that level of security is what they're willing to go with. So you have that risk to be able to monitor it, because if you don't monitor those particular cargos, is it on the sea, is it on the rail, is it on the air? You have to be able to monitor. You have to be able to understand what is going on with it at any given time, because if cargo is missing, I was involved in a cargo of a flat screen that cost about $3.5 million. Imagine a cargo of a flat screen moving from Florida to some part of the US, and the thing will just disappear because somebody is aware that there is a flat screen TVs over there. Because all they have to do is to hijack it and sell it in the black market, and the rest is easy. So and this thing, I'm not only talking about, it happens in advanced nation, it happens to any nation when your supply chain is not properly secured. And then we talk about cybersecurity and data breach, data protection. This has been huge. Actually, I am working with a friend, doctor of cybersecurity. She's a doctor of cybersecurity. We just finished recording the first ever supply chain cybersecurity course. And this is emerging of how impactful supply chain cybersecurity is an area of supply chain. You'll be shocked. Most enterprises have huge and robust IT infrastructure that prevent cyber crimes, right? But most of their jobs are not done by this. They subcontract a lot of their work out to small businesses. Small businesses don't have that kind of money to have that IT infrastructure. So they just do whatever they need to get by. And guess what? Most of the actors in cyber threat, they go through all these small companies, go through their IT world, and then they crawl to the small businesses IT world to get into the mainframes. And that's what she wrote. That's why we're losing data. Data is the new oil. For most of us that know, this data is the new oil, and because of it, if you hold data very dearly, you're bound to be successful or wealthy at some point. So imagine just hacking to people's data and just holding it and using it as a competitive advantage. Data is a competitive advantage. We'll get into that shortly. And then you have the act of God. Most traditional classic management talks about natural disaster, wars. Is that man-made or act of God? These are what we consider originally as risk into supply chain, but the risk in supply chain has evolved since then. So the earthquakes, the tsunamis, the flooding, the war-torn areas, these will continue to be a risk area for supply chain. And then we have the financials, the money. Money speaks, and money speaks. If there is no money, nothing in supply chain moves. So ability to have funds, availability of the right funds to move stuff is what really matters in supply chain. And this is what that's why it is a risk factor in there. And then we have intellectual property. That has been an issue for a lot of organizations to be able to get the necessary goods. There are a lot of solutions out there that will ease the problem of this world. But whoever works on those solutions do not want to feel cheated at some point as well. So in advanced countries, they have rules and laws against intellectual properties, but in some areas as well, they don't have regard for intellectual property, and that's where the problem actually lies. Also, we talk about supply chain, supplier characteristics. What are supply characteristics? Do you have supplier development? Who are the people supplying you? These are a risk. Are they? Who are they? What kind of capability do they have? All these things risk factors in supply chain. And also we talk about the issue of sustainability. How are we treating our environment, the people that work for us? How are we treating them? How are we being a responsible custodian to the world that we live in? That's another kind of worm. It's a different ball game. You guys have been hearing of the climate change, the sustainability is a huge impact on supply chain. A study was done by Nestle that the current temperature increase in Africa will not allow cocoa pods to germinate in the next few years. So what Nestle did was they did re-engineering of cocoa pods so that it can survive under high temperature. They stem planting it. So imagine you have a world with no coffee. I mean, imagine a world with no wood chocolate. Just imagine for a while. There's no chocolate in the world we live in. That's what will happen if Africa cannot produce, or Brazil or the Amazon cannot produce enough cocoa to feed the whole world. I don't think anyone wants to hear that there is no coffee, there is no bonfita, there is nothing of that nature in the world we live in today. So that's why they take a proactive effect of kind of affecting or re-engineering some of those crops. Unfortunately, a lot of us do not like it because it's a genetically modified stuff, but it is what it is. If you really want to get the world to continue to feed the world under this intense temperature. But for that to happen, we have to do our own due diligence, and also we have to do our own effort to make sure that we're taking care of the earth and the climate as responsible as we can. And also, we'll talk about brand reputation is huge. You know, everybody wants to protect their brand. Brand reputation is huge. Hamoye is a brand, and I know, they will do everything in their power to protect their brand, to make sure that brand remains stainless. And everything that happens to this. So brand reputation as well. Anything that a brand does, they have to protect it. So a risk to a brand is also a risk to the supply chain. And the last but not the least is the labor risk. As we can see, as currently what is going on globally is the result of labor. As of yesterday, about 144 containers are still hanging out in the Long Beach port. They cannot embark at the port over there. Reason being, first of all, the unions, I know President Biden has intervened so that they can work 24 hours to be able to unload some of this stuff. For months, for weeks, I've been following this. There are hundreds and hundreds of ships out there that cannot get on the platform. Reason being, there's nobody to operate the platform. There's nobody to operate the platform, and they're working under hours, or people are quitting because they're not paying them enough money. Then the things going to be hanging out over there, and the more things hang out, the more you cannot get more stuff in there, because the same container is going to be needed to move reverse logistics back. And there's a lot of issues, multiple layers of issues involved in this. So even if they get the cargo back into the US, there's this shortage of drivers to move those containers to their final destination. So all these things, all these complexities are part of what makes supply chain, risk management a very dynamic way. That's why I found myself. Now, any questions so far before we move into the core topic we need to speak about today?
Okay, there's only one question. There's a question from Olivier right now. The question is, if nobody buys, what's the impact of cost, losses, and luxury of goods?
If somebody what?
If nobody buys, what's the impact of cost? In terms of the goods, if nobody buys the goods, what's the impact on cost and job losses and luxury of goods?
It's huge. Everything is all circular. If they don't buy, there is no resource, there's no financial resources. There's no financial resources, somebody's going to be laid off. And there's no labor, and then the people go back. So it's all cycle, and people don't produce unless there's a demand for it, or anticipated demand. And that's where you guys' data comes in, which we're going to talk about that. And that is very interesting. It's very, very, very interesting question, actually, because everything is all loop-sided. The demand is projected. And one of the courses I teach, which, by the way, I'm a professor of supply chain. One of the courses I teach, we talk about forecasting. One of the chapters we'll talk about in operations management is forecasting. You have to be able to forecast the demand. You have the data about it. You have to be able to forecast the demand depending on what kind of cycle you are in. So if you're producing luxury goods, You need to know, of course, you know the demographics of people that are in that area. You know how they're shopping. You know their pattern of, their consumer, behavior. All these data are relatively, available to you. You will not produce unless there is a demand for it or anticipated demand for it. So, but if you do produce, which happened during COVID, you produced and people are not buying, then there's a fundamental issue. Of course, it's going to hang out because now you have inventory, you have those are assets. You can't produce now. Most of the manufacturing they've taken a huge, what do you call it? A huge kind of backlog, because if people are not buying, there'll be no resources to go on the organization. People will not be paid. If people are not paid, people have to be laid off. And that's what's happening in most of these small businesses. Is the fact of the matter is a lot of small businesses are closing their shop because the anticipated stuff and what they anticipated through their demand forecasting did not happen. They don't have enough resources. They don't have enough cash flow. They have to close their doors. So, and that is what is happening across the board. So if it becomes so severe, the organization have to pack up. And that is what we're seeing globally. Organizations cannot sustain their work because people are not buying. Absolutely. Some can weather the storm by kind of retracting and moving things around. But some don't have that cash buoyancy. They just have to pack up their bags. And that's why a lot of companies are closing down.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let's quickly take one more question before we move on. So Someone asks, since cryptocurrencies are a rising technology affecting every stage, so he wanted to know if they affect supply chain in any way.
Absolutely, but you guys call it cryptocurrency. We call it we use the old technology, which is the blockchain technology. The blockchain technology provide end-to-end visibility of supply chain. And that's one of the reasons why COVID caught a lot of people off guard. Cryptocurrency provide ability for you to see who are the main actors, all the stakeholders that are working in that particular supply chain at any given time, what the actions are doing, the timestamp of each actions, and how they affect their supply chain. And for that, if you have visibility and transparency, a lot can be done. You can move things in a faster way. And what our former way of doing things hasn't really helped us is that everybody's holding their cards to their chest. Nobody, because it's a dog-eat-dog world out there. I don't want you to see my competitive advantage. I don't want you to see my data. If you don't see my data, then you don't know exactly how I'm going to compete. And I mean, they rightfully have the ability to do so because that is their data. That is what they make money from, right? But in the crypto world, which that is a particular part we've not been able to unscrew yet, because how do we make sure that when the people expose their data in this name of transparency and blockchain visibility, how can they be sure that their data is not going to be copied or compromised? That's the thing, that because there are a whole bunch of bad actors out there. You get into somebody's blockchain, you'll be able to see what you pretty much see their data, you see their competitive advantage, and then you can use it against them. And those are the things that people are so worried about, the implementation of cryptocurrencies and all these blockchain in supply chain, because you're exposing the organizations, you're exposing the companies. They've been able to produce and been profitable with their data, using their data to produce whatever products they want to produce. But now that you're exposing it to the world, how are they going to be guaranteed that this thing doesn't happen? They don't get compromised or somebody's not using their data to produce something else. So there's still a lot of research being done in that area to make sure that cryptocurrency and blockchain is safe. But there's a lot of work going on right now. The commingling, we have some work that we're working with the issue of artificial intelligence and blockchain to make sure that there's an easy passage on those two ecosystems. These are two progressive ecosystems that's coming up into supply chain right now that people are beginning to have some interesting conversations about it. I mean, these ecosystems are here to stay. They're not going anywhere. We just have to figure out the best way that it works for supply chain. Some people are using it actually in trucking. A lot of smart contract is being used so that people at any given time, all the actors in the smart contract can see a bunch of things happening at the same time, the timestamp and whatnot. But there's still some areas whereby people are still very still questionable about it. So
thank you very much. So for the rest of the questions, at the end of your presentation.
All right, so we'll dive into the art of the matter, the impact of data in supply chain risk management. Now that You know where I came from. You know I got to where I'm doing. Now I've given you the explanation of what supply chain management is, and then what the risk area in which I played in, which is about the 13 apostles, uh, in supply chain. Now, what we have right now is how does data impact supply chain risk management? COVID has given us the opportunity to be able to, because when COVID happens, everyone and their mom were at the reactive end of it. Everybody was reacting into what COVID is, what COVID not. But myself, I am what is called now into predictive risk management, which is it's a different level of risk. And this is the reason why I'm actually having this conversation with you, because I really don't want to, when the risk is already happening, COVID is already happening right now. All I'm doing right now is to manage the risk and to manage the impact, the probabilities and whatnot, But what the future holds, and for supply chain risk managers and how data will impact the risk management of the future, is to be able to anticipate, to use data to be able to anticipate at any given time what will happen in the nearest future. Looking at the trends that have happened in the past. And at any given time, you can actually predict, like, if this particular trend is happening, in the next 6 months, I think we should be doubling our orders. In the next 6 months, I think we should be positioning the organization in some of the requirements to make sure that they don't, they're not in the short end. They're not at the short end of the stick. But I'm not making any sense here. So it is important to understand that data aggregation is the key to the supply chain risk management of the future, in such a way that now that we have enough data about COVID, so how do we now use those kind of data to be able to predict the risk of the future? And that is how it's going. Because right now, the use of data, like I mentioned earlier, data is the new oil. And ability to use data to be able to do a lot of things in supply chain, be able to predict. I talk about demand forecasting. That's most organizations are using data to predict demand forecast. As you can see, the use of data in sports, in all, data has been used extensively. But it's such a pivotal point in supply chain management and supply chain risk management as a whole, especially all of us going through COVID right now, is to be able to create algorithms, create different, APLs, to be able to use data to understand, to use the past data, and be able to and use the current data and be able to predict at real time what can happen in the nearest future. It's very possible. It's very possible that we can look at the past historical data of what's this particular event and look at what is currently going on, and we can predict what is in the future. Because people, to be competitive in the nearest future in supply chain period, you have to be able to anticipate what's going to happen in the future. People don't want now. Now is already here. It's of no use to me. What I want to be is that how can I be profit? How can I make profit? Because we're all in the business of making money. Nobody's, unless you're a nonprofit or NGO, nobody is in the business just to be, giving free stuff for the rest of the world. You're going to pack your bags even before you even start. So the ability to be able to use those data and aggregate those data, make sense of it, and help the organization in projecting risk. Like these, from these particular data and particular trends, these are the risks, or these are the possibility, or these are the permutations that we foresee. Now, let me give you a prime example. And I think this one should be able to give some clarity of thought to what is going on. In 2016, President Trump campaigned for to be the president of the United States. A lot of people thought it was a joke the first time. He started saying that I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that, right? Nobody actually took him serious, right? But some companies did, not too many. Actually, very, very, extremely, very, very few did. He said, I'm going to cancel the NAFTA deal. I'm going to do this. I'm going to shut down the borders. I'm going to do. People thought it was like, no way. It was very rhetoric in nature, right? But there's some companies did, and I spoke with a couple of them. They were able to look at different scenarios and look at data. If Trump actually became president, this was during the campaign, if actually became president, if he actually carried out with his effect, these and these are some of the things that will happen. And if this happened, how can we as an organization profit or continue to maintain our hedge in the industry? And there were several, they did a lot of permutations to it, but they were able to find a sweet spot for them, right? Trump became a president for 4 years, and a lot of people were caught pants down because they did not prepare for it. But for these two companies that prepared for it, they were able to find the sweet spot. So when Trump started activating his campaign promise, NAFTA, this thing, that, war with China and all those things, it became apparent that these particular things, these guys, Trump wasn't playing. And by the time people start pivoting to kind of shift their strategy and whatnot to be able to accommodate what is going on, by then it was too late. So those companies that actually, they've already projected, okay, if this happens, this exactly was, and these are very in the centerpiece of geopolitical and how geopolitical stuff actually, how geopolitical actions actually apply supply chain. When Trump started activating those things, those few companies were able to, okay, we already know that if this happened, these were its stuff. So they came in and they started activating their stuff. Do you know that throughout Trump presidency, they 5x their profit? Not because they supported Trump or whatnot. It's because they understood, they were able to prepare ahead of time using data and be able to predict the risk and be able to manage the risk. Now, not all risks are known. Not all risks are known. You cannot know all risks. And that's the beauty of it, the supply chain risk management. But whatever you know, you can fortify your supply chain in such a way and in such a manner that whatever happens, it can stretch your supply chain, but not break it. So what we've seen in the last 2 years or so is the fact that a lot of supply chain was stretched, some were overstretched, and a lot of them broke. But for those that have used data to fortify their supply chain, or at least nobody can really see the impact of COVID, but they were able to anticipate that if any of these things happen, if there's a kind of slinky effect happening in demands, because COVID gave us tissue paper. Our tissue paper became a commodity. A lot of people were killing themselves to have tissue paper in certain countries. Water became an issue. There's some high commodities that doesn't even make sense. The consumer behavior changed, in such a way and in such a manner that some actually became profit astronomically and some did not, all these things. So in that event, you cannot, there's a lot of risks that are known. I just highlighted about 13 major risks. There are a lot of sub-risk, a lot of risk, and that you have to make determination. Do I transfer this risk? Do I mitigate this risk? Do I just let it fly? And that all this kind of decision-making process we have to do within the risk framework. But now the question is, you cannot, there's a lot of unknown risks, which is fine. Some of the risks, you don't even know it until it actually happens. But you have to have some kind of framework in place with the use of data to make sure that you fortify your supply chain, to make it very resilient, that in case of anything that happens, whatever risk comes through, you'll be fine. And that is what data scientists, I believe, can be of great value in this new dispensation that we find ourselves post-COVID era, using the data that comes out of post-COVID era to be able to produce, to be able to predict the risk of the future. Because the real game, and this is what I've seen as an expert in the industry, is the fact that we might not know all risks, but the risk that you should be damn able to predict it and able to actually posture your organization to be like, guys, this is what I'm seeing. I'm seeing this data, and if this continues, if this particular trend continues, we need to, in this next 6 months, we need to be, storing more of this particular material, because this is what we saw about 2 years ago during COVID. And if this particular pattern continues, we should be able to use those things. And so that when this particular event actually happens, we are not going to be caught pants down. Like for the example, the chip manufacturing, we've been talking about chip manufacturing for, actually, Trump talked about it. That's why he wanted, they foresaw these chip shortages way before COVID. And I think COVID actually amplified it in such a manner that it became so huge, because now everybody and their mom is on their computer. There is a need for faster computation, and you need to produce more chip to support that. But there's already a shortage of chip already. So with COVID, it kind of amplified. That's why computers are now expensive. That's why the same chip production is being used for, it's also being used for, cars and all those kind of things. So anything that involves computation really it's going to affect, chip production in any shape or form. So using those trends to actually predict the risk for the future, I personally believe this is where data scientists can be of a huge impact. And to be honest with you, in the US, funny enough, about 45% of data, artificial intelligence engineers, machine learning engineers are actually in the field of supply chain management, because it's such a huge impact on supply chain. We are the one, actually, supply chain industry and supply chain risk management encompassing produces a lot of data these days, especially, let's say, for example, moving of goods and services, truck on the road, miles per mile, what's it called, gallons per miles, stoppages, holding. There's so much data you can use, RFID, where is it pinging? How do you move from one location to the other? How much time does it take you? All these particular data can be used to create several solutions to be able to streamline and optimize supply chain processes. So as the data predicted that so far the issue of the new ecosystems in supply chain risk management, data scientists are a very integral part of it. The use of data is more now eminent than ever before. How to study trend, using those trends, time series. Let's say, for example, time series methodologies in predicting demand. Let's not even leave the demand forecasting alone. Let's use time series in predicting risk and able to kind of position organization to make sure that the risk that they've seen before, or some of these trends, their data is out there, and use those trends to kind of develop solutions so that we can posture the organization. The organization know that risk is coming. Instead of preventing it, they just want to be in a better position so that they can make profit. Because again, we cannot have organizations not making profit. People are going to lose jobs, and things are not going to be palatable for most people. So predicting organizational productivity through the use of data is the next phase in supply chain risk management. And whatever ideas out there, throw it out, you'll be surprised how data, but now the issue about it is getting the right data. And I think, through data cleaning and whatnot, some of these things can be, eliminated and kind of alleviated. But as I see it in the near future, a lot of algorithms need to be produced, a lot of supply chain dimensions from procurement and all these aspects of different dimensions of supply chain, all these 13 major areas, they all need data. Interpretations, that there's a lot of data in that sense. The organizations are collecting it, but organizations don't even know what to do with it, actually. So imagine using those data to be able to see what the future looks like. You might not know everything, but the little that you know, it can be of a huge, huge, huge impact in preventing risk and also posturing organization in the next risk, we'll call it the risk avalanche. So I hope I've been able to share some light on how supply chain can be data can be of huge impact in supply chain risk management. I've been talking for a while now, so let me just shut up.
You certainly have. I personally am currently considering using my little skills I have and going into supply chain with data science.
Wow.
All right, so because of time, we'll take only 3 questions from the interns. There's one from Gaurav. He's asking, in the old days, how did demand forecasting work in the absence of data science?
So there are different types. You lose, depending on what you're doing in the market. If you just look at sales, you look at the sales that at least you know the sales you did in the last few months. So use the sales of the last few months to predict it. There's always a data in in the old times, there's always a date. Most people, even people if you ask people that are walking on the streets, in Nigeria or other parts of the world, they will tell you how much they've sold December last year. If you ask them, how many chickens did you sell last year in December? They will tell you, I sold 500 chickens, right? Those are data. It might not be as fancy as what you see on paper right now, but there's still data, right? So it's important for us to, data might not be as verbose like we know it, like all these data, different elements to it, but the little they have, people still have those kind of data. So you always have data of what you sold in the past. And then you use those data to kind of predict the future. So you use that as you guys probably know it, naive methodology, moving averages, and all those kind of time series methodologies. You use that to actually predict demand, moving average, and then you have, what's it called? Exponential, use those, exactly, I still remember, I still teach it, so I should remember. Exponential smoothing, and they use it. There's always data. We might not be as refined as we wanted, but there's always data. If we ask somebody, at least I know most of the traders on the street, they will tell you how much they sold in January, February, March, April till now. They will tell you the trends of how the market is going, why they've not been able to sell for a few weeks. You'll be surprised. And you can use those data, as minute as it is, they are data and they can actually make sense. You can actually make sense of it.
Thank you very much. Second question from Gilead. Says supply chain security has been on the news a lot recently, especially regarding the use of Kubernetes supply chain security. Can you please talk a bit about it?
Especially the use of what?
Kubernetes. Hold on. Especially regarding the use of Kubernetes supply chain security. So can you elaborate a bit on
Kubernetes? I'm not understanding what does it mean by Kubernetes. Oh, Kubernetes.
Yeah, Kubernetes. Sorry. Oh, my bad.
Okay. Yeah, supply chain security is a very weird one because even in the US here, unless Osama bin Laden's brother is the one driving the truck, nobody really cares. It's a very laissez-faire kind of deal. Supply chain security is supposed to, secure supply chain end to end of it, making sure that it's secured. I'm not a tech guy, so I know of Kubernetes because of my dealings with data and AI. I do not know how to even use Kubernetes, for example. I have to ask my tech guys to be able to explain to me. But if I may talk briefly about supply chain security, there is the implementation of some security tools. Maybe Kubernetes is one of them, to be able to kind of track and help in making sure that, because you can't really secure, especially except in certain industry, you can't really, how do I put it? You can't really secure the end-to-end of it, especially truck movement, rail movement. What you can do is to provide an apparatus at which whatever container you are doing, you can actually track it. And that is, tracking is the most advanced we've done in supply chain security. So at any given time, if you lose the tracking of that particular commodity or service, you can actually you can trigger that something is going on with this particular truck. And actually, I'm quite interested in that because RFID has been one of the most effective way of tracking, but these days it seems as if there's so much ecosystem that they've drawn. It has been, I think RFID concept has really lost its stage, but I think it can be reverted. So in the issue of Kubernetes, I do not know the function of Kubernetes that much technically, so I can't speak to it intelligently, but I can talk about what supply chain security is. And the tracking mechanism that a lot of organizations are using to make sure that they can secure, at least for their given time, track their supply chains. Because the most we can do these days is track it. We've not really been able to be able to grab it. For example, now, money is one thing that is secured. If you're moving money, trust me, there'll be people's security back and front of it, or highly, what do you call it? Expensive commodities, expensive supply chain are easily guarded as well. So because of the amount of, because of high dollar value items they are. So those things require physical security to move from point A to point B. But most other commodities, they just track it because it's just impossible to provide security for each and every one of them. I hope that I shed some light on it.
Yeah, I definitely shed some light. Thank you very much. Well, we're almost way past our time period. All right, so it has been a really, really good webinar. Do you have any last words for us for the weekend?
Yes. Thank you all for participating. I know this is a Saturday. You have other things you plan on doing. I really do appreciate it. The audience, I always appreciate listening here to talk about supply chain. I'm very, very passionate about it. I'm extremely passionate about it. It to a cult level, because that's what I do for a living. But I encourage you all, as you continue your journey in data science and what you're doing, to look into the area of supply chain. It is what makes the world run. Supply chain runs the world. Everything, the movement of goods and services, your clothes, the food you eat, even to your air, is all driven by supply chain. You'll be surprised. Everything is run by supply chain. So as there's so much to be done in supply chain with the use of data. And I know it might not sound sexy, but trust me, it is the industry to be in. If I can be of any help to anyone, I'm on LinkedIn. Adebayo Adeleke is my name on LinkedIn. Look me up. Follow me. I share a lot of opportunities. Insight onto what's going on globally and regionally in area of supply chain. We're working on something with Chido's who's about security in Nigeria, the use of supply chain as well. Supply chain drove me into it. So there's so much in the world that is going out there. So if I can be of any assistance and I've been an insight, I want to bounce ideas, I'm always available for that. So I'll give it a shout out on LinkedIn, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak, and I really do appreciate you all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Major Adeleke. It's been an awesome 1 hour, and finally it's time to call it a day. I want to thank especially Major Adeleke for taking out time from his very busy schedule to engage us in this webinar. Every second was worth it. And I also want to thank you all for being here today and taking out the time to listen to what he had to say. And I hope you've gained some insights, much as I did. Thank you to the Hamoye team and everyone who saw the success of this webinar. It's been a pleasure being with you all today. And I wish you all a very good weekend. Have a great day. Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Bye.